Hello everyone, this is Gene and I'm back with another video. So this is a bit spur of the moment. In fact, the past 2 days, the past few days or so have been a bit spur of the moment with everything. As I said in the previous video, I'm having a little bit of a health issue. So we'll see how that plays out. But I'm still able to make videos. I'm just not quite comfortable going on camera right now due to the health issue that I'm dealing with. If you want more information, please check out the video previous to this. But anyway, I wanted to discuss the topic of today's video. Now, this may be an odd image for someone who covers mainly comic book stuff, right? For those who may not be familiar, this image is of Ralph and Alice Kramden having an argument. If you're familiar with the TV show The Honeymooners, this is par the course for them. For those who may not be familiar with the show, The Honeymooners was a comedy that aired in I think, the mid-50s. It aired in the mid-50s, and it was based on a bunch of skits that Jackie Gleason, who is the man in this scene here, that he did on previous shows and during his stand-up days. There's a huge history behind this, right? But he eventually took these skits and turned them into a TV show called The Honeymooners. Now, the TV show itself is set, I believe, in the 1930s during the Great Depression. I believe they're supposed to be in Brooklyn, New York. I know for certain they're in New York, and I think it's Brooklyn, right? And the show was basically a comedy about, these hard-working, working-class couple, right, of Ralph and Alice Kramden, and the hijinks that Ralph and, in particular, his best friend, Ed Norton, would get up to, right? So what would usually happen in an episode is that Ralph and Norton would come across some sort of crazy get-rich-quick scheme. Ralph would come to Alice, tell her, that, hey, he's finally found the thing that will work and bring them out of poverty, right? She would tell him to be realistic about it and how it's not going to work. They would get into an argument, which is, of course, where you would get a scene like this, where he would comedically tell her that he's going to send her to the moon. I'm going to send you to the moon, Alice. And all this other stuff. And in the end, the scheme doesn't work. And he ends up having to come back and admit to her that he was wrong, right? He asserts that the only reason he does all these things is because he loves her. She tells him that, he's focusing on the wrong things and that she'll always love him, and he's trying too hard and all this stuff. And then, there would be he would tell her, baby, you're the greatest, right? There would be a big kiss at the end, and show's over until the next episode, right? So, and for those who may not know, this show actually inspired of comedies that would come after it. For example, The Flintstones, which is basically The Honeymooners, but as a cartoon about a family in the Stone Age. And even the TV show Martin. If you've ever heard of or if you've ever seen that show, and you remember the instances where Martin and Gina would get into an argument, and Martin would go, I can Tina Gina. That's where he got that from. He got that from this show. So, why am I bringing this up, you may be asking? Why am I summarizing this? Well, because apparently, according to an article from Bounding Into Comics, which I will link in the description, apparently there's a comic book in Marvel #1 which has a story about Spider-Man and Mary Jane, and apparently at the end of this story, Peter says something to the effect of like Ralph Kramden once said, baby, you're the greatest, right? And then Mary Jane responds with, shut up, that show was so misogynistic. And that's why I'm responding to this, because as someone who grew up watching The Honeymooners, now the show had been off TV for decades by the time I saw it, but it used to be one of those TV shows that they would play at Nick at Night, and I go back to when to when Nickelodeon was on Channel 6 on cable. So it used to be on Nick at Night. It used to be on a lot of late night TV shows and whatnot. I remember for many years, I think it was New Year's. WPIX, Channel 11, here in New York City. They would play a Honeymooners marathon. And I remember many years sitting up way too late for a little kid watching the Honeymooners marathon release, watching as much of it as I could with my family back when we did things like celebrate the new year coming in. So this show, oh, excuse me, this show is near and dear to my heart. So to hear a Marvel comic refer to it as misogynistic, it's quite insulting to me because the show was the furthest thing from it. For its time and for its day, Alice is actually quite the empowered woman. Now, yes, right, she doesn't have a job of her own, she's a housewife and all that, but here's what makes her character so revolutionary for its day. She was by no means punked or intimidated by Ralph. If you've ever seen the show, or if you want, I'll leave a few links in the a description. There are plenty of times. It was like a staple of the show that, you know, he would make this comedic over the top threat. To the moon, Alice! And she would literally just stare at him the way she is in this picture here. Completely non-pulsed because she was not afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of him in the least. And in fact, her character got some of the best lines and some of the best zingers against Ralph. She would, whenever Ralph pissed her off, right, whether he was complaining about how she didn't sew his socks or whatever, she goes on like a 2-minute rant about how she didn't sew his socks because she's been cleaning the house all day. And guess what? It leaves him looking foolish. And you can, one of the great things about Jackie Gleason is that he had such great expressiveness in his face. And whether it was expressing anger or laughter or frustration or whatever, his face just turned it up to like 100. And every time Alice, you know, rants against Ralph's assumptions or his expectations of her, right, and she shuts him down right quick, he always looks like a puppy dog who has just been kicked. Always. There are plenty of compilations online of her cutting him down for many reasons, and my God, the number of fat jokes she made at his expense. Oh, believe me, you want to talk about body shaming? She's one of the originators. She's one of the originators. The only difference is that she would never take those shots at his weight until he pissed her off enough. Right? But here's the thing. This show is by no means, in my opinion, no means misogynistic. Ralph never actually hit Alice. It was an over-the-top comedic threat that she herself never took seriously. In fact, there are several instances where she flat out challenges him to actually make good on his threat, and he never does, and she knows that. More importantly, in the context of the show, these are things said in frustration. Ralph doesn't mean them. He's just upset that she does not believe in this new harebrained scheme that he's found his way into. Now, there is plenty of comedic physical abuse on the show, but it's toward Norton. It's toward Edward Norton, a man. Ralph's best friend. He's the one Ralph is always cutting down, insulting, smacking on the back of the shoulder, or pushing, or smacking upside the back of the head. Before the Gibbs dope slap from NCIS, you had Ralph Kramden slapping the bejesus out of Ed Norton. Right? This show, in my opinion, having watched many episodes of it, did not in any way, in my opinion, promote or encourage misogyny. Ralph is always proven wrong in the end. right? Always proven wrong. He always has to come back at the end of the episode with his tail between his legs and apologize to Alice for everything he said and everything that he did. And there are plenty of episodes where she gets so fed up with him, she damn near leaves him. So believe me, she was not just putting up with him and not saying anything or not fighting back or not asserting herself in any way. She's probably one of the most assertive housewives in media, especially for the time period the show aired. Again, mid-50s. American culture was quite different then, right? A woman typically, at least not out in public, was not going to act the way Alice did. And actually, her depiction, or rather their depiction of their relationship, was actually quite different than what was on TV at that time, because you had shows like Father Knows Best and similar shows where like, everything seemed idyllic, right? If there were any, I guess you could say, arguments, right? They were settled quickly. Everybody spoke kindly, and this show was, for its time, a lot more gritty, right? You have this hard-working husband, his smart-mouthed wife who's always frustrated with him, right? It showed a very different side of America, right? And of what city life was, right? In a time where, moving to the city would have been glamorized. This was showing, no, living in the city wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a guarantee that you were going to have everything. It showed a gritty, for its day, a gritty, hardworking couple, right? And most importantly, especially when it comes to the charges of misogyny, let's take a look at what the definition of misogyny is according to Google. Now, according to Google, come on, here we go, computer. Misogyny is a dislike of, a contempt for, or ingrained prejudice against women. I want somebody who is logical to tell me how a show about a hardworking union bus driver in Brooklyn, New York, who's trying to make enough money to give his wife everything he wants to give her. Everything that Ralph does is motivated by his intense devotion and love for his wife. For whatever threats he may make in the heat of anger, he loves this woman, right? He loves Alice dearly. Whenever there's a chance she might actually leave him, this man falls to pieces. When she's upset with him, he falls to pieces. Every episode makes it clear that everything he does, right or wrong, is because he loves her, and he honestly feels very insecure about the fact that he cannot provide a better life for her, right? They live in this broken down apartment, and, Alice from time to time will bring up how, she doesn't have the modern conveniences of the day, like a vacuum cleaner or a washing machine or a TV, right? These things sound common to us now, but back then, they were actually, really new and expensive and the hot new thing to have, and she never had it. In fact, their friends, the Nortons, Ed and Trixie, right? They're like that, like, couple who always sort of, has everything that they want, and it causes a bit of envy and tension at times. But everything Ralph does is out of love for his wife. Every episode makes that clear. Every scheme he gets into is because he loves her. Everything that he does is because he loves her. He's not always the best at expressing it, and he's short-tempered. And she understands that about him. And she makes it clear every episode that, what she loves is him. And that she's willing to, stay with him through it all because she loves him. He's so obsessed with trying to do better and get better, he keeps overlooking the fact that he has a ride or die wife. But anyway, and any episode, you can watch any episode, and you'll see that Ralph is absolutely besotted with this woman, and that's what drives and motivates him. So I would love to know how a show that depicts the woman as in the right all the time, that depicts the husband as deeply in love with his wife and motivated to do better for her. His problem is that he just keeps falling into every get rich quick scheme. So tell me again how this show is misogynist. He's constantly the loser in the end. She's the one always getting him with the zingers, and the show makes it clear that she's way out of his league. Even he doesn't know what in the world she sees in him. But tell me again how this is misogynist in any way. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying you have to like the show. Yes, there are many things like the comedic threats of abuse that don't fit in today's world. I get all that. But at the same time, this is why you have to look at things in context. Yes, in today's world, things like "To the Moon, Alice," or if you want to go with Martin, I can Tina Gina, right? Threats of abuse, especially toward a woman, are not going to be tolerated, and I understand that. But it's one thing to say, hey, I don't like this thing in this show. I understand it was fine for its day, but it really wouldn't fly today. That's fine. That is perfectly fine, but there's a difference between saying that, acknowledging that there are elements in the show that would not work in today's culture, and then saying it's a misogynist show where, from what I can tell, it was anything but. Now, it's never said in the comic why she feels it's a misogynist show, so the only thing I can assume is that it's in reference to Ralph's threats of abuse, but as I said earlier, Alice never flinches. She never acts scared. She challenges him constantly. And she gets him plenty of her own zingers against Ralph. So again, I would love to see how this show was misogynist. And another thing that drives me crazy, just in general, is the fact that if you judge everything from the past by today's standards, then guess what? Nothing will ever measure up, because there's always going to be something that is problematic from a show in the past, right? Whether it's Ralph's threats, whether it's Martin's threats toward Gina, whether it's I Love Lucy, and Lucy constantly wanting to be in Ricky's work, right? In Ricky's business. She's not trying to be independent. She's trying to be all up in her man's professional life, right? And on top of that, Ricky Ricardo, even for its day, is a walking, talking Latino stereotype, right? If you want to look at everything with this overly critical eye, then believe me, everything you look at will be problematic. Because guess what? It wasn't made with a modern day audience in mind, I should say. When Jackie Gleason made these skits originally, he wasn't thinking about, what will the audiences in 2020 think of my work? He wasn't thinking that. I don't think he even thought 2020 was something that would ever exist or happen, given the time period, right? The mid-50s and the space race, right? So everything going on in the real world, and then the show itself being set in the Great Depression. Nobody was thinking about 2020 and what people would think is acceptable and not acceptable in 2020. That was too far. That was like, stuff that like science fiction shows like Star Trek, right, imagined. And even Star Trek only went as far as about 1992, which I think is referenced in the episode City on the Edge of Tomorrow or something like that. That's about as far as it went, right? 2020 was incomprehensible to most people in that time period. So can we please stop, first of all, just being intellectually dishonest? In my opinion, to call the Honeymooners misogynistic and A, not explain why, is just being intellectually dishonest, which is why I then have to pipe up and make an overly long video, because I cannot stand intellectual dishonesty. But to also have such a narrow view that you can't accept the fact that, guess what? TV was different in ye olden days. And it continues to, I know, and it continues to be different. And it will continue to change. And believe me, in another 40, 50 years, there'll be people. I heard her, I'll be there in a minute. Yeah, I heard. There will be TV shows 40, 50 years, or people 40, 50 years from now who will be judging today's work by their standards. Maybe then, when it's their work under scrutiny, they will understand. I'll see y'all around. Bye.